The Honourable Michael Woodhouse.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I'm very much looking forward to an overview of the budget and in particular the votes in my responsibility, but I cannot let the final comments by Ms Genter go unchallenged in respect of public commitments to public transport and in particular rail. And I'd say two things about that. Firstly, wild commitments that are unfunded are not commitments. They're just promises of the future. And it was this government that found the funding to meet the need for the electrification of Auckland. And I'll say also this government has committed, I'm not sure of the exact number, but I'm sure this is pretty close, $3.4 billion investment into Kiwi Rail and another $250 million in this budget just to help Kiwi Rail stay afloat. So let there be no question about this government's commitment financially to rail, but it needs to be smarter than that. Big grand plans for rail and rail links and things like that, to the neglect of the way in which the vast majority of people do go about their business, and that is on roads. And let's just remember, most public transport goes on roads. And the significant investment of, I think it's about $100 million that Minister Bridges has announced for cycleways means that this government can hold its head high in respect of its commitment to both public transport and cycleways. But budgets, Mr Speaker, are hard, and the longer governments are in office, the harder it can be to put together packages that in straitened times continue to fund the programs that are existing, while looking and finding the funding for those new programs that are invested in. So I was extremely proud to be part of a cabinet that came up with the package for families in hardship. And I must say it was a surprise to most, not to this side of the House. And I think Barbara Kuriga, my colleague and friend from Taranaki King Country, I don't know if this has been publicly said, Ms Kuriga, but her description I heard recently of the reaction from the Labour opposition when that part of the budget was being read was like seeing a child reach out for a balloon that burst in front of its eyes before the child could grab it. That, I think, was the best metaphor for the reaction and the surprise that Labour had, having banged on about how heartless this government is, to be the first government since 1972 to increase support for families in hardship over and above the cost of inflation. Well, the member is quite right. My offer to the member and my chequebook is still in my pocket. I'll pay that $1,000 back when just one member says that they didn't take the tax cut. That's all I'm asking. It's not a big ask, but not one has knocked on my door yet, Mr Speaker. And I think that package reflects this government's compassion towards those in most need, while at the same time acknowledging, and I heard Mrs Tolley in Question Time today say that the best pathway out of poverty is work. Well, I would suggest actually that that is the only pathway out of poverty, and the constant battle and the resilience that one needs to be able to pay the first bill, then the next bill, then the next, and not live fortnight to fortnight, is to find work, and work that can be sustained. And I know as Minister of Immigration that that work is there. Now, the fact that we do have a skill mismatch, a geographic mismatch, and the challenges for many of our young in particular in terms of their ability to be able to get and sustain work are ones that this government will overcome. But let there be no doubt that with the support comes an expectation that working age beneficiaries will seek work. And I think that's what the taxpayer who invests in their support would expect. We have had a focus on exports and growing exports through these straitened times. One thing we have failed to do, Mr Speaker, the one export that seemed to be going gangbusters under the previous Labour government that this government has singly failed to do is export its people. Because we could fill Westpac Stadium with the people who were leaving these shores every year. And the Prime Minister, as Leader of the Opposition, made a commitment to turn that around. We turned it into a bus and then a phone box, and now they're coming back. and they're coming back not only in positive numbers for the first time, but Australians are now looking to this country for the job opportunities that a strong, growing economy will have. And I was at the Brisbane Job Fair, one of 4 that the government initiated in Perth, Brisbane, Sydney and Melbourne, and the level of interest in and applications for the jobs that were available by the employers that went over to those job fairs was very, very high. There is a nervousness across the ditch about their economy, and I think last year's budget by the Australian government was an example of where slashing and burning and not sticking to a plan can have political ramifications. This government has not done that. And there would have been a temptation, I suspect, Mr. Speaker, to cut just to get to surplus. I would much rather suffer the slings and arrows of that opposition about the government's failure, albeit by a wafer-thin margin, to achieve surplus than to cut important programs just to get there. And not only did this government not do that, but it invested very heavily in its most vulnerable. But with that flow of people and a significant increase in the number of people wanting to visit New Zealand, our tourism industry, our single largest service export earner, has gone very, very strongly over the last couple of years from emerging markets. Immigration officers in Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou are very, very busy with a significant increase, 40 or 50% year-on-year interest in that growing middle class in China wanting to come and visit New Zealand. It's not just China, it's India, it's the rest of Asia, it's the United States. New Zealand is a desirable destination, but with that comes risk. The important challenge for immigration is to ensure that we let the right people in, that we keep the wrong people out, and so I was very pleased to be able to announce a $33 million increase in Budget 2014 over the next 4 years to ensure that those growing passenger arrival numbers do have a commensurate increase in the risk management and the advanced passenger processing that we have for them. And indeed, another $32 million announced as Minister for Workplace Relations and Safety, because many of those people are coming to work or study here and have work rights attached to them. And it's very important to me, as Minister for Workplace Relations and Safety, that they are well looked after, that the people that are helping us rebuild Christchurch following the earthquakes can do so on the back of supportive employers and not exploitive employers. Now, I think the incidence and prevalence of that is quite low, but it's very important that we keep it that way. And so the extra investment in the Labour Inspectorate, which has now increased that team by 40% since we came to office, is a significant reflection of this government's priority to make sure that our migrants who are working are made welcome and well looked after. The task is prevention and then prosecution for those who fall below. And I must say it is very disappointing that Labour and the Greens did not support my immigration amendment bill, which significantly increased the punishments on employers who knowingly exploit legal workers in this country. I just want to touch on Vote Police, an extra $164 million into the baseline to consolidate the police's funding to continue the excellent work that they have done in reducing reported crime in this country to its lowest level in 30 years, a more than 20% reduction. And that's been done in a number of very, very smart ways, using technologies that this government has enabled them to get police out from behind their desks and their cars and be out on the beat, visible and supporting their communities. And their iPads and iPhone technologies is just one example of the hardware that they've been given to support their communities, but also the very clever tools that are being developed by their software providers to ensure that the process of infringements and prosecutions is a much more efficient one. The Policing Excellence the Future program, I think, will continue to deliver excellent results in enabling police to have and maintain the very high levels of trust and confidence, probably world-leading for a law enforcement organisation, that the public have had in them, despite the fact that they work in extremely difficult parts of our community. I want to commend them for the work that they do, and I certainly will continue to support them in their efforts.
I call Ron Mark.
Mr. Speaker,
as it gives me some pleasure in